Yes, I am.
Oh, sorry. Sir, when you actually think about how that hostility would translate into a security threat to the Scottish people, is war something really desirable?
No, we're not saying that there's going to be war between Scotland and the UK. We're going to say that if there's another financial crisis, the United Kingdom won't be able to step in and help Scotland because they view it as a country that renounced their obligations, and the Scottish economy will go the way of Ireland. That is a concern we have here, right? No, thank you. So, what do we see happens in the status quo? In the status quo, Scotland is moving towards greater regional autonomy. They're moving towards a state where they can make their own social policy, where they can have their own expression, where they're more independent from the fiscal union of the United Kingdom, right? De facto independence, which is what is happening in the status quo, solves for every harm that has been advanced by the government, and it does so better. What is the consequence of de jure independence? The outcome of this referendum, the mere fact of Scotland declaring itself sovereign. They're forced out of the European Union, which undermines the country. They're forced out of NATO, which hurts the country. They're forced out of a currency union, which hurts the country. They alienate their nearest neighbor, which hurts the country. And they destroy their ability to function on the international stage, right? So, what have we heard from the opening government responses, right? What do they view as the benefits to independence? When you wash away all of these sorts of independent benefits, the only thing they tell you about really is that Scotland gets better independence, speaking generally, if it's a sovereign country. It gets less brain drain. But it's hard to see how any of this actually materializes. It's hard to see why merely being a separate country would actually cause people to stop leaving Scotland. So at the end of the day, Scotland can solve for all of its harms by moving towards greater regional autonomy. It can avoid all sorts of powerful detriments to the Scottish economy and Scottish people by retaining de jure membership in the United Kingdom, and as such, we should reject a policy that's hurt Scotland for no benefit. Thank you.
To end the case of the government, may I call for the government witness.
Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the way that we all should assess this debate is consider the context in which of what is happening currently in Europe. We have a shrinking Eurozone, we have a shrinking UK economy. Now, what is the most strategic way for Scotland to defend itself from the harms of the shrinking European Union and the shrinking United Kingdom? We think the best way forward for Scotland is to disassociate themselves with UK and the Eurozone, ladies and gentlemen, for them to be able to protect themselves. So what am I going to talk about in this debate? Firstly, we're going to analyze the point on whether whether or not Scotland will be able to stand on their own feet economically, and we're going to prove to you they can. But before that, because that's the bulk of where the debate took place, and then I'm going to talk about what my extension speaker talked about that wasn't really responded by this side, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we will conclude the debate. Sit down. So now let's first look at what came out from CO. They argued that the new element that came out from CO is that currently the UK have debts. Some of them are caused by Scotland as well, and if they leave, then UK will have to bear the cost of Scotland's debt, and that will be harmful in terms of their relationship with UK. Firstly, we think that is based on the premise that Scotland won't pay back the debt, i.e. all the harms would only accrue if Scotland don't pay back the debt. We think that it is very easy for us to come up with a payment plan where Scotland can proportionally allocate some funds for the debts that they have accrued, ladies and gentlemen. That came out loud and clear from opening government's case. But even if in the worst case scenario where Scotland don't pay their debt, we don't think the way in which UK will react to Scotland is as hostile as CO wants you to believe. This is because of the economic interdependency between Scotland and other UK countries, where there's a lot of trade going on, where England also needs oil from Scotland, for example, ladies and gentlemen, which will mean that it is not in the strategic interest of UK to not cooperate with Scotland. Therefore, we have provided you two responses to CO on how a payment plan we can come up with a payment plan, but even then it won't be as hostile as they wanted to talk about. Secondly, they said that now security will be an issue for Scotland because now NATO has pledged that they won't allow Scotland to be part of NATO. We don't see how this is important to Scotland, ladies and gentlemen. Because we think that once they get independence, they won't have immediate foreign policy interest within the global community. We think in the future they can renegotiate certain terms with NATO. But furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, we think that Scotland is not at risk at going to war with everyone. There's no, like I said, that we don't think that that is the primary focus or interest of Scotland. They can have their own military. Obviously, friends will help them because of economic interdependency. We don't think that's an issue. So all this means, ladies and gentlemen, that this will be better for Scotland. Before I move on, yes.
Your partner's argument was business generation, and you say they're not going to join the European Union. So are they going to borrow at crippling rates from other people, or are they going to join the Union and get benefits?
Of course, there are different possibilities, right? It's either Scotland join the EU, which is better than sticking with UK, ladies and gentlemen, and we have proved to you that. But even if the European Union is not good enough for Scotland, we think it is better for Scotland to stand on its own. And I will show you why it won't cripple Scotland in this issue. Right? Firstly, they argued that Scotland cannot stand on their own feet because they don't have agriculture and oil is unsustainable. Let's compare that with status quo. With UK's economy shrinking, with radical immigration policies, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't allow the countries in UK to innovate, to have more talents to stay within the UK. We think the UK economy is shrinking and its exports are also shrinking, ladies and gentlemen. So we think, in comparison with status quo, Scotland being on its own will be better off because now it gets to disassociate itself from the policies that the UK is pushing, ladies and gentlemen. I.e. now Scotland can have more liberal immigration policies to allow talents and to come in and help the economy. And we think that is an important thing because currently, because of the political duel between Labour and Tory, Scotland is unable to do these kinds of things because the central government decides that they can't. So in that way, we think Scotland will be more sustainable because they get to disassociate themselves with these conservative policies. But secondly, we think that when Scotland have their own currency, ladies and gentlemen, they will be able to be competitive in the export market because their currency now will be devalued as compared to the pound and the euro, ladies and gentlemen. And they can use this as an edge in order for them to make their products or their oil, ladies and gentlemen, more competitive in the international market. I.e., more competitive than other states within UK, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we think they will be alright on their own. But lastly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that unlike Greece or Ireland, Scotland has oil and whiskey, ladies and gentlemen. And we think, ladies and gentlemen, unlike Greece and Ireland, they didn't have anything to offer. Therefore, we think that they will be able to sustain themselves, ladies and gentlemen. And there's a lot of potential as well because there's huge potential for oil discovery in the North Sea. Like the oil that we're talking about in this debate is only newly discovered, ladies and gentlemen. There's definitely more oil out there that the Scottish people can find. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, for all of these reasons, we think Scotland will be able to stand on their own. Now, what did we talk about, ladies and gentlemen? We told you that the people of Scotland are going through a process of political apathy. Because whatever they want to do, the central government won't allow that to happen because of the interest of the Anglo-Saxons, so they don't treat Scotland like as if they are part of that nation. So what happens then is that people don't have an incentive to stay. People like Andy, people like so many Scottish friends go out, leave Scotland, ladies and gentlemen, because there's no potential for them to be economically, to have economic opportunities, ladies and gentlemen. But lastly, we want to add that it is important for Scotland to gain independence so that they get to disassociate themselves from the policies that Britain uptake, including things such as foreign policy, ladies and gentlemen, where UK and the West are more expansionary, they are interventionists, ladies and gentlemen. We think Scottish people would like to disassociate themselves with certain things and contributing to these kinds of explorations by UK and the West. Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this debate, we have to realize that what is most strategic for Scotland is to leave the Eurozone and to leave UK. Because both of those blocks are shrinking and it wouldn't be strategic for them to stay within these blocks. For all of those reasons, we're very proud to stand proposition.
We will now have Nadine to speak on behalf of the hosting court.
Is everyone ready? Mr. Speaker, in the opening video we saw the idea of freedom being very important. Unfortunately for the proposition, they go for de facto freedom, but overlook the analysis that my partner Braden gave you that they would not have substantive freedom because it would be bound by the shackles of financial instability, political lack of autonomy, and that is not what Mel Gibson would have wanted. We, alongside opposition, present to you the reality of the situation. They present to you the idea of an emotional exaggeration. You should side on the former. Now, I'm going to present to you two main questions. One, what is better for Scotland politically? And second, what is better for Scotland financially? I'll answer both of those questions such that you understand that it falls to the opposition. And before I get to that, I'll address some of the falsities that Shafiq just gave to you right now. Now, we see a couple of arguments coming out. The first one is that Scotland will pay. The first one is that Scotland will not. The first one is that Scotland will pay back the debt. That goes against what opening government told you, right? My partner Braden asked you in a point of information what would happen, and they said that it would be proportional but relative to population, except for a certain discount that they would probably have. This is on video camera as well, so this is an argument that my partner actually has. But second is that it would still create the perception that they can't pay it back, right? Because people still remember what happened to Ireland, Cyprus, and Greece. And if people understand anything about finance, it's that investor confidence is something that's very important. Now, they say that the United Kingdom wouldn't care about independence because of oil dependence. No, this is false, because it would functionally make UK the position of Germany, and it would make the Scottish people in the position of Ireland, Cyprus, and Greece. We think that this perception of financial turmoil would make it so the United Kingdom would not want to bail out Scotland. Andy doesn't even want to go back there, so you can definitely agree on that point. Now, and what's more is that the United Kingdom already has a lot of oil revenue as well. It's 0.8% of national income for London, etc., which means it makes a lot of sense. Now, the next idea, not at this time. The next idea is this idea that NATO doesn't matter. False, because autonomy rests on the idea that you can have force to back that up. If you do not have a national defense framework, you don't have the kind of autonomy that's requisite for a Mel Gibson movie, which means that they don't have any solvency in that regard. The next idea is that the EU doesn't matter. Well, if the EU denies a bid to Scotland, which they're pushing for right now, that sends a signal to the entire globe that Scotland is not a good country worth investing in, which means all of their ideas of immigration go down the drain because people like Andy would never go back. Now, the next idea is that they want to focus on immigration, right? We think that immigration doesn't outweigh financial instability because this is what affects the average person in Scotland, and nobody would want to go there if it's unstable. Second is that it would increase borrowing rates for capital, so the wealthy immigrants wouldn't want to go there. And thirdly is that it would increase mortgage costs, so once the immigrants get there, they would leave again because it would be way too expensive to live there. And finally, it's this idea that oil would lead to more money. Well, this is not true because it would be because Scotland would still be susceptible to oil shocks, etc. So placing all your eggs in a basket of oil is empirically bad. And secondly, is that financial instability would also outweigh any revenues from oil. Now, the final argument that we see, this idea of expansion, right? We think that the idea of the United Kingdom supporting and the idea of NATO supporting them is such that they would be able to shoulder most of the burden anyway, and they get a lot of benefits from that. But now, I'll get to the two main questions. But before I say that, I'll address your point.
The reason why Scotland won't go the way of Ireland, Portugal, and Greece is that these countries did not have the ability to devalue their currency. What would happen is a trajectory like Iceland, which was able to renounce the debt and it was not invaded, and is now growth above.
Right, I'm going to address this in my second point. What's better for Scotland financially? But since you brought it up right now, I'll bring it right now. What is better for Scotland financially? My partner gave you 3 independent scenarios for financial ruin, and there was scant response. Firstly, the idea of the currency, right? The population wants the pound system, but Britain would not let that happen because they would see an autonomous Scotland away from the United Kingdom. This went unanswered, and because the population would want it, clearly voters would probably be more rational to accept the pound system and shouldn't leave it. Now, what happens if they no longer have that currency? It means that there's reduced credibility, it means that there's increased mortgage rates, it means that there's increased borrowing costs for capital. This kind of thing matters for financial development, which means that it would still go the way of Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. Sorry, Hattie. Next, the idea of financial stability with respect to financial assets, right? Lloyd's Bank as well as the Royal Bank of Scotland are all based there and have about 12 times the amount of financial assets of GDP of Scotland, which means that it creates a breeding ground for instability. The reason this is important is because they would not have access to the United Kingdom's central bank, which means they wouldn't be able to support such an unstable framework. That's an independent scenario for a meltdown because of perception from investors, etc. This is something that's important because it still weighs on the mind of people who remember Greece, who remember Ireland, who remember Portugal. So even if it wouldn't actually make something like that happen, the perception of it would. And thirdly, the independent scenario of debt, right? It would Scotland would renounce the debt, which would lead to a national crisis, or they would try to pay it back, in which case it would still have indentured servitude for the next umpteen years. This is not actual de jure. I mean, this is not substantive freedom. This is shackles of financial ruin. Now, the second question. What is better for Scotland politically? Not at this time. What is better for Scotland politically? My partner outlined the idea of de facto independence happening right now, right? And this was a lot of analysis given to you by the opening opposition. They presented to you the idea that there's more of an independent parliament, able to express your concerns, right? What my partner expressed to you is that this is a movement that will continue into the future, which means the independence that they want, the social policies that they want, will be able to be addressed right now, especially because they have access to the UK central bank, which will make welfare policies stable in the long run. And what's more, politically, it's better to have a national defense framework. Yes, this is true. That actually matters for things like tariffs, etc., as well as for national pride. That's actually something that's very important. But if they lose access to NATO, that would hurt them politically. If they have no means of getting into the EU and are shunned because their bid isn't accepted, that would hurt them politically as well. And thirdly, if they don't have the United Kingdom to fall back on, if they don't have the kind of partner, they would not actually be able to have any substantive kinds of political autonomy. Now, what have we shown you on side closing opposition? We've shown you that there are 3 independent scenarios for financial ruin for Scotland. We've shown you that this constitutes a financial shackle, stranglehold for Scotland. And secondly, we've shown you that politically it is not in Scotland's best interest to become independent. And it's for these reasons that we strongly urge you to not defer to the opening Mel Gibson movie. Rather, we ask you to defer to reality, to logic, and to analysis. Thank you very much.
Please approach the house and shake hand and leave the room.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.